I'm Katrien Devolder. This is the Practical Ethics Channel. Thanks for making the time for yet another interview. I think you're the person I've interviewed the most. This time I would like to talk to you about your recent article in The Lancet. So in this article, you together with Francesca Minerva and Julian Savulescu defend the Global Kidney Exchange Program proposed by Rees and colleagues. So perhaps we could start with you explaining to us what this program entails.
Yes, certainly. So, as everybody knows, there are lots of people who need to get a kidney who are on dialysis. The dialysis may keep them alive for a while, but it's not a good quality of life, and in fact their life is significantly shorter if they're on dialysis than if they can receive a kidney transplant. Now these are people I'm talking about in high-income countries who can afford to be on dialysis and maybe have health insurance, or there's a national health insurance scheme so they can afford to get the kidney transplant. In addition to those people, there are also, of course, people with kidney disease in low-income and middle-income countries who may not have any health coverage or national health scheme and who cannot afford dialysis, nor can they afford the procedure for a kidney transplant, even if they have someone who is willing to donate a kidney to them. So what the Global Kidney Exchange Program will do is, if you have a pair in a low or middle income country, that is a patient who needs a kidney and a donor who is willing to donate a kidney to that patient, but they can't afford to do the procedure, the program will fly them over to an affluent country where the procedure can be done. But it won't just directly use that donor and that patient. It will rather add them to a pool of people who have potential donors and patients but are not matched. That is, they don't have the right blood type to be able to donate the kidneys. So by adding another donor to that who is willing to direct his or her kidney to anybody, as long as the recipient also gets a kidney, you can increase the possibility of what's called a chain or a kidney exchange. So one kidney goes to one recipient, and then the donor who would have been prepared to give to that but isn't a match gives to somebody else, and so you can match them all up. And so you might get 4 or 5 or 6 kidney transplants taking place, which is of course a great benefit to people in the affluent country. But it's also a benefit to the people in the low or middle income country, because they get flown to the affluent country where they can have the transplant free of charge. Plus, they then get flown back to their own country with $50,000 being put into a fund for their post-operative care. That's not a cash payment to anybody. No, neither the donor nor the recipient actually gets the money, but it's put into a kind of a fund that is controlled by a third party to make sure it is only spent on healthcare. So I see this as a win-win situation for all of those involved. But I found that it had been criticized by people involved in bioethics, and so together with Julian Savulescu and Francesca Minerva, we decided to look at those criticisms more carefully to see if they were valid, and finding them not valid, to indicate why we don't think they should be a barrier against the Global Kidney Exchange Program.
Yeah. So, I read about one criticism of, I think it was the Council of Europe's Committee on Organ Transplantation. And they seem to object to the program because they say it would amount to organ trafficking, which is considered immoral, and I guess it's illegal in most countries. So what do you think of that criticism?
Well, I don't think it's a good criticism. I mean, let's assume that we are opposed to people selling organs. I mean, that is in itself a somewhat controversial issue, but certainly what has been happening with exploited people, not well informed being paid cash for organs and not getting good care is something that I think is clearly wrong. But I think there's a very clear distinction between the Global Kidney Exchange Program and organ trafficking, and that is that, as I've already mentioned, the person who is the donor does not get any money for the donation. The only money involved goes to this third party where it will pay for the post-operative care that the patient needs, and if, of course, the donor needs it for any reason, if something has gone wrong, they would also be able to use it. But it's not a cash payment. So I don't see it as trafficking at all. And I also would add something that Janet Radcliffe Richards said in her book some years ago about kidney transplants, that kidney transplants save lives. And if you have an ethical objection to something that saves lives, it has a very high barrier, a very high hurdle to overcome before you should accept it. Because you have to think that, well, if we stop this program, there are people who will die who could go on and have quite long and healthy lives.
And so another concern people may have that it is exploitative, because people in these low-income countries are in a bad situation. I mean, they're very poor, so they might just accept any offer, and maybe they wouldn't take part in this program if they hadn't been poor. And maybe, some people might be concerned about that.
Yes, people do make that objection, but I think it's even further away from being a form of exploitation than it is from being a form of trafficking. I mean, I can kind of see why people are worried about the trafficking, because they see this money going to the low-income country, but they don't realize that it's not going to the donor. But in the case of exploitation, the notion of exploitation has to suggest that someone else is taking advantage of the needs of others, and is doing so in a way that does not treat them as equals, or does not seriously consider their interests. But the Global Kidney Exchange does very seriously consider their interests, and after all, it saves the life of the patient in the developing country, who almost certainly would die otherwise, because without dialysis or a transplant, if you have end-stage renal disease, clearly you're going to die. And it's not just taking advantage of them in some way. It's actually is treating them like it treats the people in the affluent countries. It's giving them, as well as doing the transplant for free, it's giving them a substantial sum for post-operative care. So I don't see where the exploitation is. I think it's a clear benefit for the people from the low-income country who are participating in the program.
Yeah, and sort of the flip side of exploitation is concern about coercion. So concerns about exploitation arise when the offer is sort of too low. It's an unfair offer. But of course, when you make the offer higher, people may be concerned that you're actually coercing someone into the program. Do you think that is a concern that we should take seriously here in this case?
Again, I don't see this as a coercive offer. There is, has to be acknowledged, in any situation where a patient desperately needs a kidney, whether as part of the Global Kidney Exchange Program or as part of ordinary domestic kidney patient treatment in an affluent country, there is some risk of people being under pressure. So, if I were to need a kidney, and there is someone in the family, another member of the family, let's say there's only one other member of my family who has the right blood type and could be a suitable donor to me, then that person may feel under a lot of pressure. What will the rest of the family think of them if they refuse and I then die? So, yeah, it's inevitable in this kind of situation that there is pressure, and we must make sure that, as sure as we possibly can, that the donors have made their own choice and are comfortable with that choice that they've made. But I don't think that it's really a very different situation when you introduce a pair from the lower middle income countries. There's the same pressure. That is the pressure that there's someone that they love and care about who needs an organ and will die without it.
So do you think the program has any vulnerabilities? Are there aspects of it that could and should be improved if it is implemented?
I think if it were to be implemented on a larger scale, so far it's been quite small and therefore you can look at things carefully. On a larger scale, you would need to think about various safeguards. I suppose one concern that the people who are concerned that this is a kind of organ trafficking might have is they might say, well, how do we know that the patient in the low-income country has not given cash to the donor? How do we know that this donor really is doing it altruistically? So, one way of doing that would be to say, well, is the donor the spouse or a family member of the patient? That would exclude altruistic donors. And in fact, it's a strange situation that has been the case here until fairly recently. I've heard this from Zell Kravinsky, who was one of the early altruistic donors in the United States. And he said that when he went to the Philadelphia hospital and said he wanted to donate a kidney to the next person on the waiting list, and he chose a hospital that mostly serves African Americans, they sent him for psychiatric examinations. They thought he must be crazy to do this, and he took a long time for it to convince them that he was really sane and acting from altruistic concerns. So, in a way, I'm reluctant to exclude people like that in low-income countries, but yes, it would be hard to be sure that there wasn't money changing hands if there was an unrelated altruistic donor.
So, presumably, there are still differences between the care that the patients get in the higher income countries and the care that patients get in the lower income countries. Presumably chances of survival are better in higher income countries. So why does the program send people from lower income countries back to their countries after the transplant has taken place? Why don't they keep them in the higher income countries and help them there?
Yes, that's a good question, and certainly there are different standards of healthcare between low-income countries and high-income countries, and I wish there weren't, and I wish we could overcome that completely, but nobody has been able to achieve that kind of equality yet. So the reason why the patients are sent back to the low-income countries is really that the cost of post-operative care is much lower than in the high-income countries, and so it's economically feasible. I mentioned the sum of $50,000 that is sent to the low-income countries for the post-operative care. That would not go very far in the United States, and so a lot more money would have to be raised, and therefore fewer pairs could be helped from the low-income countries, and fewer pairs could come and help provide matches in the high-income countries. I should add that the medical team does stay in close contact with the people in the hospital in the low-income country where the patient is returned to. So they are, in a way, mentoring them and checking up on what's going on. And I think they're also, as a side benefit, contributing to improving the standards of care in those low-income countries.
Thanks very much. Again.
Okay. Good. Thanks.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, don't forget to subscribe to the Practical Ethics channel.